Hi everyone, it's Anne with Art on the Creek. Welcome back to my studio. We are continuing our February 2023 series of backyard birds. Today, let's take a look at the northern flicker. Now, we've done a few of these birds together, and I think you know that I cannot take a photo of them to save my life. I did get some cute video of them, though, a while back when we had a big snowstorm. The chickadees actually were patient enough with me. Every time I go to the kitchen window, our feeders are right outside the kitchen window, and every time I go to get close enough to take a picture, they fly away because they can see me coming, and I'm really a nice person. I don't know why they fly away. I feed them every Sunday. You know, it's funny because every time I go out there and feed fill the feeder and put a new suet in, and we only feed them in the wintertime. But every Saturday, they kind of get a little grumpy. And then on Sunday morning, the magpies are the first ones out there. And they are squawking and talking, and they're kind of looking in the window. So I think they know that I come out and I feed them. And especially the squirrels, too. When I do get out in the backyard and get ready to feed them, they are all chitter-chattering, waiting for me to go back in the house so that they can feast. So I really do love watching them. Today I wanted to take a look at the northern flicker, and because I cannot take a picture of him, we're going to use one from Pixabay, which is really nice. I'll link to it in the description. I like this one because I like the way that he's holding his head up. These birds are really, really cool. I don't know a lot about them, but I will tell you what, they don't really show up in winter. He's an exception. He's not really a winter bird. But what I want to tell you about this bird is they scared the heck out of my husband and I last summer. There was a mating pair that came. In fact, they do come every year in the summer. And the way the sun angles and hits our back window, not the kitchen, but the big living room window, there's a reflection, and it must look like it's continuous sky to the birds. We've put stickers on there. We've tried everything, but they still hit it. This flicker came flying at our window so hard that the noise it made when it hit the window, both my husband and I jumped clear up. You know, it was just really loud. It was very, very scary. And I thought, oh my gosh, look at that. And of course, you know, it leaves a bird-shaped splat on the window because they're not the cleanest animals in the world. And there was a feather stuck to the window, and I thought, well, that's unusual. He hit really hard. So I thought maybe he was injured, and I opened the door, and oh my gosh, you guys, so we open the door, and there's a deck right below this big, huge, what do you call that? A picture window. And he hit the picture window. He was laying in the corner of the part where the deck meets the house, and his neck was twisted in a really awful way. Don't worry, this has a very happy ending. I wouldn't share this story with you if it had a sad ending. And we thought, oh man, we're going to have to find a place to bury this bird. You know, this is a very sad thing. Well, we were looking around trying to find what to do and figure out how to pick him up. And I opened the door opposite, which is our bedroom door that also goes out on the deck. And I noticed that he was breathing. And I thought, oh my gosh, he's going to make it. I mean, he was out cold for at least 5 full minutes. And so I said, let's just wait. Let's keep an eye on him and let's wait. And he came to, and that poor little guy, he sat there for a long time, just looking around, trying to get his bearings. I put a little jar lid of water out on the deck. I didn't get close to him, but I put it out there so that he could see it. And he didn't even want it. He did end up just flying away. But these birds, I wanted to paint him because they are, in my mind, the most resilient bird. Anybody that can get hit that hard and survive and go off to live a happy bird life is a pretty amazing animal. So I do like these flickers. If I remember correctly, they might have an annoying habit. Yes, I did remember that correctly. I have consulted the internet gods and they have confirmed it. Their nickname is the machine gun woodpecker. They kind of find things that are metal and they go with their beaks. And I'm sure it's to attract a mate. Lord knows that would impress the heck out of me. But yeah, bird mating rituals are so strange. I get a kick out of watching those on National Geographic shows. But anyway, they make this noise on anything metal, and they'll do it on the top of our chimney. And when our Sheba was living, I remember the flicker making a noise like that up on top of our chimney. We have a gas fireplace. And she went over to the fireplace because, it echoed down, and she could hear it, and she cocked her head and looked, and she thought, what the heck is happening here? So, okay, enough about flickers. Let's talk about the painting. Right now, what I'm doing is I've got my very large size 14 round Princeton Neptune brush, and I'm just going in and getting it wet. And I'm going to do something kind of fun with the background. I have this one paint that I really love to use for backgrounds. It is called Cascade Green by Daniel Smith. It's a multi-pigment paint, and so it'll separate into different colors. I like mixing it a little bit. You'll see how I mix it. I don't really blend it on the palette, but mix it on the paper when it's wet with some yellow. And it ends up looking, it has a lot of depth to it because of that multi-pigment variation. And it really makes it look like a tree. So the different levels of leaves in a tree. So what I'm going to try to do here, you'll see when I get the water, I'm kind of gone into the body of the flicker there at the bottom. And I didn't paint his legs. So what I want to do is try and see if I can just make him hidden in the tree. Because you know what, Flicker? That's where you're safe. You don't need to fly into our window. You just need to hang out in the tree. So there's this Cascade Green, and I think it's just so beautiful. The pigments that are in it are PBR7 and a PB15. Now, PB15 is pigment blue. That's what the PB stands for, 15. It's a phthalo blue, which is a beautiful staining blue. We use it a lot. There's a red shade, a blue shade, a green shade, and I think that's all. There might be more, but I really like phthalo blue. It's just a nice, kind of like a crystal clear turquoise color. It's really beautiful. And then the PBR7 is burnt sienna. Some companies will use PR101 for burnt sienna, but a PBR7 typically is a burnt sienna. And so it's got that granulation. The pigments will separate because they're different weights, being different pigments. And then they'll pull up these different color striations when you're done. And I really like using this. I'm going in and mixing a azo yellow with it. And I know I got green in my yellow paint up there, but don't worry. I do go through and I clean up my palette periodically. And it just doesn't bother me. I know that some people really like to keep it super, super clean, but it's watercolor. You just take a damp paper towel and wipe over it if it gets contaminated with another little bit of paint. Now, you could certainly make an effort, and I probably should make more of an effort to keep all of the paints pristine and in their own colors, but I just go through periodically and wipe them up. In fact, I did after this painting. I have used the dredges of that palette for long enough now, and I have found that I'm needing to find places to clean off the palette so that I can create room to mix or have a clean color. So this particular palette has room for 33 different paints. I absolutely love this palette. I cannot tell you how much. I am so thrilled that I bought it. It keeps the paints so well with that. It's got a silicone gasket that goes around the lid. And then there's, to the left there, you can see the palette tray. That will lift out and you've got a whole additional space, that full lid size underneath there. So let's see. Again, I'm so sorry. Back to the painting. This is Daniel Smith Buff Titanium that we're going in with now. And I'm just trying to get the base color of his chest feathers there. It's not, he doesn't really have a tan chest, but since he's going to be in the trees, he's going to be shaded. And you'll see something later that I do that might be shocking, but I think it worked in the end. I hope so. I think I like the way this guy came out. I don't know. All you can do is keep trying, right? Every painting is practice. So I kind of like to sketch with my paintbrush as well to just kind of get a little bit of suggestion of what's going on that I'm painting. As you know, I'm not a realistic painter, so be prepared. This bird is not going to be a photorealistic painting. Now I'm using just a gray mix from my palette. So chances are what's in that one is indigo and burnt sienna. Now the indigo is Daniel Smith. I'm sorry, not burnt sienna, the burnt umber. And the burnt umber is M. Graham. However, this time I did mix in some of the transparent red oxide, and that is a Daniel Smith color. That's another really good one to have in your palette. I really like that one. With this bird series, I kind of like highlighting some essential palette paints, because a lot of times when you buy your first set of paints, or if you've just stuck with your split primary palette and haven't really expanded it, you know, a lot of these paints that I have in this particular palette actually, you won't have. And a lot of times I think these are just really essential to my paintings. So I just want to share some of these colors with you. So again, that is the Transparent Red Oxide by Daniel Smith. And let me tell you the pigment information on that one, because you're really going to love this description. It has notes of cinnamon and tobacco. Isn't that cool? It's like describing a whiskey. And in fact, you know, when you get a whiskey colored leather or a saddle tone leather, to me, that's what this color looks like. And I mix it with that indigo to make this gray. It's just a nice warm gray, and I love it. The Transparent Red Oxide does granulate, and let me see if I can find out which pigment that is. I was able to find out some information. This is interesting. The Daniel Smith Transparent Red Oxide is PR101. I love this color, and that is what I know Winsor Newton uses for its burnt sienna. Now, that might only be in the Cotman line. I'm not sure about the professional line, but it's so interesting. You'll find this across the board with pigmentation of watercolors, is that the numbers might be the same, but the color names may vary. The colors may appear entirely different. The PR101, the burnt sienna that is in the Winsor Newton Cotman set, has a lot more orange to it. This one is deeper, and it has a lot more dimension with that granulation. It's just a really beautiful color. So anyway, that gray that I'm mixing right there is the indigo, which I love. Daniel Smith indigo is my favorite of all the indigos. I've tried Core, and I think it's just more like a navy. It's too blue. And then M. Graham I've never tried, but Daniel Smith, there was no reason to try anything else because it works so well. Now I'm going in with one of my purples. This one is the Carbazole Violet, also by Daniel Smith. It's just a good bluish purple, and it's nice and sheer, and I really like using this one to highlight some things under black. So I've got that layer of Carbazole Violet under there, and now I'm mixing more of that indigo and the Transparent Red Oxide to create a dimensional black to layer over the purple. There's a lot of highlights in that chest feathers of his black there, and I didn't want it to just be flat and boring. So I'm hoping that when this is done, you'll be able to see some of that different color that's underneath there in the layers when the light hits the painting. And that's what's so nice about watercolor, as I'm sure you already know, is that when you layer these transparent colors one over another, their dimensionality and depth will really help you not only create a more beautiful painting, but it will entertain your eye a little bit more. That's why watercolor looks so much like the light is coming from behind it rather than pointing at it like an oil paint. Oil paintings are, of course, stunningly beautiful, but watercolor is kind of a unique animal. It has that innate ability to reflect the light that bounces through every layer of paint that you put on your paper, down to your paper and back from your paper through the paint and back to your eye. So it's a really incredible, scientifically fascinating element, media for art, and I just love using different layers. So that's why I always mix my blacks. You get a lot more dimensionality that way. So I'm just kind of making it up here, I'll say, with his chest feathers, using that same mix of black and just kind of putting a few dots here and there, because he's got enough distinctive markings with that black chest and the brown around his eye, the red on the back of his head, and his spotty feathers, that we will definitely be able to tell that he's a northern flicker. I don't really need to go to all of that detail to paint all those little feathers in. Not that I would want to, but there are a lot of wonderfully talented, detailed painters out there that you can follow on YouTube and learn a lot more from them about painting photorealism than you can from me. It's just not something I enjoy, and I prefer to make my art a little more expressive by doing these kind of sketchy paintings that I create. And if you like them, if you're here, I assume you like them, and I'm glad to have you. So now I'm going back into some of that violet there, and I think what I'm going to do is just put another very thin wash all over the chest feathers there, and that'll help that light bounce a little bit. I don't really think of those things about the light bouncing when I'm painting. I know that that's what it does, and I know that there are a lot of ways that you can mix blacks. And so when I look at this flicker, what I try to see is, okay, yeah, he's got black feathers there, but what other colors do I see? And on my monitor, it might be different on yours, but on my computer, when I pulled this picture up, it looked like the shininess on the feathers there was a little bit purple. So I wanted to have that in there. Now this one here, I've got a little bit of a mix on my palette, but it's mostly Naples yellow. This is an M. Graham Naples yellow. It's very close to a yellow ochre. And I wanted to be able to have a Naples yellow. I think it's a semi-transparent paint. I really like it. It's just such a beautiful earthy yellow. And I will use this or yellow ochre a lot in my paintings of animals and landscapes because it's a color that appears a lot on fur, and it's quite often in landscapes, rocks, especially in the Southwest where I live in the United States. We have a lot of that transparent red oxide, and we have a lot of this Naples yellow and burnt umber and indigo and a lot of those colors. So these are kind of standards on my palette. And you'll see I'm kind of dipping into that goldish area. I've mixed it with some of the red iron oxide to help transition in from that black to this gold, because I wanted to use the same paint that I had mixed. If I had mixed my black with burnt umber, then I would have used burnt umber around his eye there to darken the feathers. Now I've got a little bit of that black, and I'm just going around the top of his head. I'm trying to create, it's almost like when I first looked at him, the feathers on his head looked a little bit like a blue, like a pastel blue. So, if I were painting him in pastels, great, I would just pick up a light blue. But when you're using translucent watercolor to convey something that's kind of powdery looking, and I didn't want to add gouache right here, not yet. I didn't want to deal with the white yet. I did at the end, but not here, and we'll get to that when I get there. And actually, I didn't even use gouache. I used bleed proof white, which is an ink, different animal, but still perfectly safe to use on watercolor. So I'm taking this gray, the same gray that I mixed, and it's just a thinner wash of it. Anytime you see a gray or black on this particular bird, it's that same mix of the indigo and the transparent red oxide. And it's just in varying degrees of viscosity. If you thin it down, you'll get a lighter shade. And of course, if it's thicker, then it will come out darker and ultimately almost black. In fact, the Daniel Smith indigo is so dark that if you use it thick enough and in a small area, you can perceive it as black on your painting. I've used this technique before. You've probably seen it. It is where you take your paintbrush, put it over on the palette, and kind of spin it around while it sounds horrible, but while you're mashing down the paintbrush. So you're kind of spinning, you push down on your paintbrush, spin it in a circular motion, and that splays out the bristles. And what that will do is allow you to make feather strokes or hair strokes. And I use that quite a bit when I'm painting animals, grasses, a lot of things. So now let's see, I'm just using the tip and with varying pressure here to try and create that black under his chin. And I've got a lighter shade of it here, so it's not quite as viscous, but it's more viscous than when I was painting with the feathers on his head. And I'm calling it black, but just remember, it is that mix of indigo and the transparent red oxide. So we'll just go in and fill this. And I like to leave some of the white spaces because I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to layer this second layer here. And I always just have a habit of just leaving some of those spaces. And what I really like about being able to paint black next to white, especially with feathers, is that you have an opportunity to do some negative painting. Now, what I'm doing there on his chest is just adding the final dimension of black to those layers. Now here we'll see that negative painting in action. You just, by bringing that black up into the white, do you see how it creates a white feather going down over the black? It's kind of an optical illusion in a way, but I really love it. It's a great technique and it is good to learn. So now here I'm cleaning out. See, I do clean things. This is a Holbein Jaune Brillant. I really love this color. I probably should have sprayed it first, but I wiped it with a wet paper towel to get it as clean as I possibly could because it's got a little bit more peachy tone to it than the Buff Titanium. The Buff Titanium is very much a good solid tan base. The Holbein Jaune Brillant has just a little bit more of a peachy yellow, and it is also a semi-transparent, kind of opaque-ish watercolor. There's a distinction between semi-opaque and semi-transparent, but I don't have that information right in front of me, so forgive me. But it's not purely transparent. Let's just say that. This Jaune Brillant, Brilliant Yellow, is a great color to show the first layer of feathers. Now, I just painted little bits of V's in there that you can probably detect, and now I'm going in with that same mix of black and adding the shadows under those feathers. So there's on his throat, right below the black patch and above his black chest feathers, he's going to have white feathers that are shaded with Jaune Brillant and divided with a shadow of this grayish tint that I've mixed. Now that I've got the throat done and I've allowed that brown around his eye, the golden brown around his eye to dry a little bit, let's get some pure ultramarine. And this one is a Daniel Smith Ultramarine Blue. And I'm going to put a little blue spot on his eye there for the highlight. If you look closely at our reference photo, you'll see that highlight is not pure white. It is, it's blue, it's reflecting the sky. So we've got that there. And also the beak isn't pure black. It's got some other colors going on. So I'm taking that ultramarine, which is just a great color to start a shadow base next to black. I didn't want to use purple here because it's definitely not the same tint. And again, this is on my monitor as what's going on there on his chest feathers. So I've just put a base wash of ultramarine there. And yes, I noticed I missed some of the background there right under his beak, but no worries. We'll go back and fix that later. So now I've got, again, a thicker wash of this black that I've mixed up. And I'm going to just put in some suggestion of spots on his wing feathers. They're so interesting. They have the spots, but they're just a little bit different shape. Of course, all wing feathers are, but I just thought it was so interesting that he has the spots on his chest feathers as well as his wing feathers, because typically birds aren't that way. They've got some different design. So the flicker's pretty unique. And I'm just painting the top part of his wing here because the bottom part of it will be hidden in the tree. So I'm just kind of sketching. Here's where I kind of sketch with my paintbrush to just kind of suggest where that these feathers are different than the ones on his chest. That's kind of all I'm trying to convey here. And just really taking a glance at the reference photo and just kind of seeing where this pattern goes, how it looks, trying to get the shadows in and the dots and some of those feather outlines to make it look a little bit like the feathers are bigger on that side of the bird. So I wanted it to be a little bit sketchy, and it is. And with that wing finished, now I can go in and get some of that red going on his little patch on the back of his neck. You know, when I stared at that photo, it almost looks like a heart shape that's folded over the back of his neck with the center of the heart going down his spine. I just thought that was so interesting. I'm using mainly a Core Pyrrole Red Deep, and I've mixed in some of that Azo Yellow to warm it up just a little bit. And I'm just going to leave some white space there because I will go in later on this, and I'll go over it with some Potter's Pink. And before we get to that Potter's Pink, I think the beak has dried enough that we can go ahead and go in with that same black mixture and kind of paint the striations of the beak on there. Now, his beak is pretty bumpy, and I'm not going to try and put those bumps in. I just got to interject here. I'm so sorry if you can hear. I'm in my basement studio next to a window, and my next door neighbor is using his snowblower. We got a ton of snow today, and so if you can hear some strange noises in the background, I've got my heater running, so you might hear a fan, and the snowblower next door is going. So, you know, real life happens here too, just like it does in your house. So anyway, forgive the little background noises. I hope the sound is okay. All right, so we're just painting in little bits and scratches on the beak just to make it kind of look like his beak isn't entirely smooth. And I really like the way that ultramarine gave me that foundation so that I could do that here. Now, the ultramarine and transparent oxide blend is still the black that I'm using, and again, just changing the levels of viscosity to try and get the darkness to pump up to where I need it. And they're working on his nostril as well, and then just the little bits of feathers that are here and there. And then we can go to a different part of the bird. We'll skip forward just a little bit here. My favorite part of all animals to paint is the eye. I will tell you that it takes a lot of practice to get this down. You need to have enough confidence with your brush control to be able to do this. I'm using a number 8 round. Sorry, I couldn't say number 8. I'm using a number 8 round Princeton Neptune here, which has a beautiful point. It's the brush that I use probably for just about everything. But if you would feel more comfortable using a smaller brush, that's always an option. And in fact, when something gets real small, I do switch to a smaller brush. But for this eye here, I thought I could pull it off with the round number 8. When I first started watercoloring years ago, it was incredibly scary and very difficult for me to dive in and paint those eyes. And here you are, you're painting an animal. Everything looks so weird. It starts to just look like pieces of shapes, and the painting goes through an ugly phase, and you just think, oh my gosh, why did I even start this? What am I doing? I know nothing. It's so easy to be hard on ourselves, and then you get yourself so psyched up that you can't possibly try to even paint in the eye because you're so worked up. So I would just recommend breathing. Make sure you're hydrated. I've always found that if you drink enough water, the world just is a little bit easier to deal with. But I don't know, maybe that's because I live in a dry climate. But anyway, here I'm going in with another layer of that Naples yellow tinted with just a touch of the transparent red oxide to try and get the depth around his eye there. So anyway, back to the eye. I recommend practicing making little, just, take a sheet of watercolor paper and practice making little circles, making little eye shapes, and leaving a little space for a highlight. If you miss that space, it's not a crime. It's just fine. There are no highlight police. No one is going to come and tell you you're a horrible person. Just, oh, well, I missed it. And then go on. When it dries, you can come back and either with a white gel pen or with some bleed-proof white, you can add that highlight in on your own. Nothing is ever a complete lost cause. Now I've got a very thin wash of ultramarine blue, and this is where I thought I would do something that might shock you. I'm putting blue on his stomach, on his chest there. It doesn't look normal, it doesn't look right, but it will. Let's remember that watercolor, when it dries, has that color shift, and it does go a couple shades lighter when it dries. And I've got a very thin wash there intentionally so that I could put it on very lightly. I didn't want to disturb those dots underneath. And then blot it off very lightly so that I could get a mottled feather effect. The paper towel sometimes will leave some texture on your paper. I wanted that. I wanted this paper towel to leave some of that depth and dimension on the blue, and it really did. It was like one of those things that, well, this is an experiment, I'll try it and we'll see if it works. And it did work out really well. And so I recommend that, to give it a shot. If you're looking to put a shadow under an animal's stomach and he's in some grass, or he has a texture on his fur, like like curly fur or something like that, go ahead and try a thin ultramarine wash and then blot it off very gently with a paper towel. Don't press firmly, just blot it off very gently. And I think you'll like the results that you see. Now I'm fixing that part under his chin where I didn't have enough and of that background. So what I'm doing is I'm going to go around the entire bird and just kind of create another wash of background here. Some of it right there that I'm doing right now, that's just water. And then I'm going to drop in some more of that azo yellow. That's an M-gram color. And then I will, in various places, drop in more of the Cascade green. This will help punch up the background, but it will also help avoid having any hard water lines, because I did go in wet on dry with that area under his beak, and I wanted to make sure that I had a complete blending all the way around. So I didn't want to take any chances. I just decided to go ahead and add some more layers. I really like doing backgrounds like this anyway. I think I was just having fun and just dropping the paint in wet on wet and then spreading it around a little bit, trying not to cover up what I had before, but trying to augment it a little bit and making sure that I stayed very close to the bird on all points. and trying to keep that background looking wet and uniform. It's really fun to paint this way. I really enjoy doing backgrounds like this where you just have the wet background and you drop in varying shades of color. I think it's so nice to be able to do that because it just sends the background right into, it makes it recede, it sends it further into the background, and it helps your subject really just jump forward. So I was enjoying myself painting that. Since I did have that background pretty wet, I went ahead and used my heat tool to dry this thoroughly, and I also put the heat tool on the back side of the painting just to make sure it was completely dry. And now I'm going in with that Potter's Pink, as I promised you. This is a Daniel Smith shade. It is a beautiful, beautiful pink. It reminds me of the Botticelli paintings, just the pink of that era. I just love it so much because it's a very earthy pink, and it granulates beautifully. I've mentioned this before, but I love using it on wildlife because it's such a nice color that would be naturally occurring in a mammal. And it's also beautifully granulating, which gives you texture. So things like dog noses, kitten noses, bunnies, things in their ears, the pink tint to mouse ears or bunny ears, or even some dog ears. It's using the Potter's Pink or on paw pads of animals, anything like that is really going to give you a leg up. I love it when you can find an art supply that does the work for you. And Potter's Pink is definitely one of those paints that I recommend adding to your palette. Obviously, I've switched from the Potter's Pink and I'm using Bleed Proof White. This is a product that you can get. P.H. Martin makes one that's very popular. You'll see a lot of YouTubers use that one. I prefer the Daler Rowney. It just acts better in my climate. They're both equally wonderful, but the Daler Rowney is one that works better for me. So I'm getting the wispy feathers that overlap on the wing and just kind of adding a few highlights on the stomach, just kind of trying to put those brightest points in now wherever I think they would look the most natural on our Flickr here. And I've got the brush. What I did was I put a little bit of that, the pigment from the jar, I put some in the lid, and then I was able to splay out my bristles that way by using the lid as a palette. So I just, again, pushed the brush down, rotated it, and then that splayed those bristles out so that I was able to get some really fine, random-looking hair strokes. So let's finish this up and see where we're headed next. That green was so vibrant that I thought what this needed to be a sure sign of spring is just a little bit of white flecks going on. It could be little blooms happening in the tree, or to be honest, if you're here in Colorado and it's springtime, it's probably snow just starting, even though the leaves are coming out. We get a lot of snow in the spring, a lot more in the spring than we do in the winter. But I really love the way that this looked. It just gives, when you splatter with white especially, it just gives it a little extra something that makes it look just a little bit more energetic, a little bit more whimsical. And I did cover my bird, but I didn't cover anything on my desk. I had to clean up Bleed Proof White off of my computer, off of all of my paints, and off of the remote control for my radio. So, remember to cover things when you splatter. I never do, and I always tell people to remember, but see, you can see my hand there. It's kind of a full contact sport using splatter. When you do splatter, the way to be successful at it is to have the paint or whatever it is you're splattering with to be wet enough, and you have to have a pretty juicy brush in order to get all that splatter on there. So just added a few little highlights to his chest feathers there. And now we're going to do my absolute favorite part. I'm using that heat tool to assist me in getting the washi tape off of the paper. A lot of times you can just pull that washi tape off, and this is an Arches sketchbook. The paper's very high quality, but I always use that heat tool to release some of the stickum, some of the tackiness, because you never know. And I just really don't want that tape to tear my paper. And because I'm using old washi tape, it's always bled through on every single one of these bird paintings. But I'm using this tape up, darn it. I bought it. I'm going to use it. I think I just bought too much washi tape, but oh well, such is life. I enjoy having that crisp border, so it's no trouble for me to use this washi tape. I've just had it sitting around too long. Anyway, I'm using the Bleed Proof White there to cover up the little spills. And, you can tell that it's been corrected like this, but for a sketchbook, it's totally fine. I wouldn't rely on it to do a big, huge repair, but for what I'm doing here, it works so well. So guess what, guys? We are done. I'm going to get out my favorite fountain pen and go ahead and sign this one. And that is another backyard bird that we can add to our library. This journal is going to be full of birds when I'm done. That's kind of fun. So thank you so much for joining me again today. I always love having you guys with me when I paint. I had so much fun doing this, and I hope you had a good time watching it. So I will just say goodbye for now, but I'm so glad you joined me as always, and I look forward to seeing you next time. If you do paint a flicker or any bird that's in your area, go ahead and tag me on Instagram @ArtOnTheCreek. I would love to see your work. Take care, guys. See you later.